In the background of the nationwide calls for justice for George Floyd and other Black Americans killed or mistreated by police, there are the images of massive looting. Across the country, businesses, small and large, have woken up to smashed windows and stolen goods. Terry Nguyen is a reporter with Vox and joins us now to discuss. Terry, for better or worse, the images of the riots and the looting are shocking and often make the headlines. You point this out in your article. So fascinating. It dug into why we are seeing so many people who feel like they have nothing to lose and therefore they're comfortable taking advantage of the unrest to loot. Can you explain?
Yeah, so for this piece, I spoke to Dr. Darnell Hunt, who's a sociologist at UCLA who studied the 1992 Los Angeles uprisings. And pretty much he says that we have to look at the protests in context of the larger events that are happening in our world. For example, there's a pandemic. There are millions of Americans who are also out of work. And it's important to note that during any type of civic unrest, there is a lot of social and just emotional chaos. And the line between peace and violence can very easily be crossed by either protesters or police officers. And it's important to say that protesters are not a monolith. And it's important to know also that a lot of people are really working hard to keep part of these protests peaceful. But just due to the turmoil, kind of the disorderly and frenzied nature of protests, when you look at these images, it's very hard to figure out what people's motivations are if you look at them kind of just as this large group that's taking to the streets.
So, do you see this tying into the larger systemic changes that are needed in America?
Yeah, I do feel like right now there's a lot of kind of narratives that exist out there, and there have been clips of people who aren't affiliated with Black Lives Matter at all who are looting. There are people who believe that looting is an anti-capitalist action, as I mentioned in my piece. And as Dr. Hunt says, there's just a lot of people who feel like they don't have a lot to lose. And just when you're on social media or just watching the news, there are just so many clips of so many people. And an important quote that Dr. Hunt said that really stuck with me is that he says that these instances show a breakdown of legitimacy. People are breaking the law because they feel like there's no consequences for these actions. And as you mentioned, he says that a lot of these looters don't have a lot to lose because these actions really aren't. If you do have a lot to lose, you're likely not to participate in these types of actions.
One of the interesting things that you asked him was around this narrative of outside agitators, people from the outside coming to different places to cause a little bit of trouble. And his argument was that it doesn't totally matter, right? That we've heard that before. Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. On top of his quote, kind of where he says it doesn't matter where the people are coming from or why they're doing it, there's a moment that's created for them to participate in these actions. And if you do look at what's happening across the country and even across the world, there are, I think last time I checked, more than 200 protests happening in the US alone in various different cities. And so this argument kind of doesn't hold weight when there's just so many protests happening. I can't imagine people traveling from city to city, especially during a pandemic, to participate in such a large civic action.
It's pretty clear, though, many of the looters not associated with the protests. But how do we distinguish looters taking advantage of the situation and maybe just trying to get some free stuff, and those who really want to make a point in line with the protesters?
It's really difficult. I mean, in the news media itself, I mean, it's impossible to untangle every person's motivations and intent. But I did see a clip, I think, from Santa Monica, a Santa Monica local reporter who saw people who were raiding the Patagonia store, and they were asking, what are your motives? And these people just ran away. And so I do think it's difficult for us to construct a whole narrative as to who these people are, what exactly are they doing, but it's important to focus on how this is a collective moment where people feel the need to be on the streets. And there are definitely people who are protesting peacefully. There are clips of people telling looters to stop, sometimes getting in the way of them. And there are people who clearly are capitalizing on this moment for chaos. And so it's just important to see that a lot of people are taking to the streets right now. And I think that is the main story that we should be focusing on, that people feel the need in the midst of a pandemic to really go out and be surrounded by thousands of other people.
There was a recent op-ed in the New York Daily News from Errol Lewis. He says some of the blame for the chaos in the streets needs to be put at the doorstep of the activists who called people to the streets without ensuring that the effort would further an agenda, put pressure on a specific target, or advance relevant, winnable demands. And he points to an example many years ago with Al Sharpton, who had organized a civil rights demonstration and told the crowd, no violence. If anybody gets out of line and starts that stuff, I'll turn you over to the police myself. Do you think any responsibility falls on the protesters or at least the organizers?
I do think right now we don't really know who is organizing. It seems like a very large decentralized action. And it's important to say that a lot of organizers are doing the work. There are people hosting mutual aid networks, people sharing information on social media of how to protest safely, what to do, what to bring to keep yourself safe. And I feel like in many cases, a lot of people are doing this work anonymously out of fear of being tracked and quite possibly being arrested. In a large crowd of people, it's not just organizers, but I do think it's incumbent upon a protester, if you strongly believe in nonviolence direct action, that you have to check other people. And on social media, there are instances of that. But again, it's just the scale of this chaos and unrest that makes it so difficult because you could be in a different street protesting peacefully, and there is someone else on the other side of the street who's participating or looting. And so, like, how do you square that, really?
Is there an argument that the looting and the rioting and the destroying property might actually help the cause?
Yes, I mean, you can look at the civil rights movement with a lot of in the Black community. They certainly were divided between Martin Luther King's peaceful approach versus Malcolm X and the Black Power approach. And Dr. Hunt told me that when it comes to history, it's sort of a mixed bag. People will argue that, property damage and theft will drive more media attention to the cause. And certainly, if you see what happened at CNN in Atlanta, that certainly did drive the cameras toward the protesters in that way. But it is, no one can really tell until this moment has passed how effective that is.
At least here in New York, Governor Cuomo has torn into Mayor de Blasio on his response to the violence. What responsibility falls on the local government? Is there a way to call in the National Guard without perhaps escalating things?
I do feel like right now, just judging from the actions of state and local governments across the city, that they are taking more of a stronger law and order approach. And many have enforced curfews, states have deployed the National Guard, but also they're stopping social services. Like I saw that Philadelphia has closed some of its food distribution sites. Transit, for example, is not operating after curfew. I had a friend who arrived in New York City at an airport and found that Uber and Lyft were not functioning after hours. And in LA, they've closed several COVID testing sites. And to be honest, these actions don't appear to help the situation because protests at large are about police brutality, but they're also about state-directed violence. And people are really angry. In DC, many local reporters I follow said yesterday was the largest turnout they've seen after President Trump kind of tear gassed people by kind of where he wanted his photo op. And so people are paying attention and they are really, really angry.
All right. Terry Nguyen, a reporter with Vox, such a great article. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about it.